Hello, guys, and welcome to a brand new episode of the podcast. I'm here with Neha, and we're actually going to be talking a little bit about the Artemis project that the NASA is actually undergoing with right now. So I should have done a little bit more research, but fortunately, Neha has. So, how about you talk a little bit about how the project came to be and like what are some of the goals that the project is really wanting to achieve?
Yeah, so I mean, we all know the first Artemis mission, like Apollo. Um, Kennedy wanted to get on the moon. He got on the moon, space race, fun stuff. But like the actual overall goal of the Artemis project is just to enhance moon exploration in particular, right? So there's two current projects other than Artemis 1 that has already happened. There's two current projects that are currently in the works: Artemis 2, Artemis 3. Artemis 3 was just in the news, but really quickly we'll talk about Artemis 2 first. This one hasn't happened yet, but its intent is to send people past the moon. So seeing essentially how far we can go, how far people can stay within, I suppose, space without having to land or do anything. Just see how far we can go, because eventually one of the goals that NASA has is to have a manned expedition to Mars.
So that's really like the end goal here,
that's
right?
the end goal, yes.
Taking little steps towards that. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think it's really interesting because we haven't had, we all merit being able to go to the moon with the whole space race that we had against the Soviet Union, the US back in the day. And it's really interesting how like the moon, getting to the moon was that like breaking point where that would basically determine who was winning in terms of technology, in terms of education, in terms of all these things. But like we never really made it back, right?
Yeah, no.
Which is insane. Like if you really think about it, usually with a lot of things that either various companies or maybe even the government does, like they keep at it and they expand upon it. But like this is the first time we've actually gone, or like there is an attempt to go back to the moon, which I think is also interesting because you'd think just going back to the moon, like the first time you did it, so now it's like the second time you could just kind of replicate a little bit of what you've done.
Yeah.
But there's so many things that are like not only in conflict with it, but also the fact that like they're wanting to do so much more, right?
Yeah, with Artemis 3, that's the next manned expedition that the US has since the very, very first one. The plan for that is to actually establish some sort of like semi-permanent presence on the moon of sorts. So yeah, like Ricardo said, it seems like it would be easier the second time, right? But it's harder because we're trying to actually make technology that can be reusable, which like SpaceX has kind of like already worked on. So like rockets. We've established that we have rockets that can come back to us, which is great. But here one of the main things we're trying to do is establish some sort of like moon space station of sorts. I don't remember exactly what it's called. It's like moon landing station, something like that, MLS. Very, very, very tiny version of like the International Space Station, I suppose. Just so astronauts have some place in the moon's orbit to conduct studies. So once this is in place, like the moon will actually be like a site for continuous like scientific research and exploration, which it isn't right now because when was the last time we were there? It's been a while, 1970 something.
Right. So yeah, I think it's really interesting also sort of to talk on top of that of like, I went to the site just kind of looking through it, making sure that I sort of understood what we were talking about this time around. And one of the things that I kind of like looked upon and pondered on was the fact that it said like economic opportunity. So like, would you like to expand on that and how going to the moon can potentially impact the economics of the world, right? Like what really is the economic driving factor for this mission?
Yeah. So the moon is a small place, right? But we don't have a lot of interaction with it, so that makes moon things very expensive. There's people who also theorize that there's a whole bunch of things on the moon that we can reliably use as resources, as a source like for different minerals and rocks. I also saw this thing. It's called helium-3. Apparently it's super useful for nuclear fusion reactors, which aren't very common, but we don't know how the future of nuclear energy will turn out. But yeah, that's an aside. Helium-3 is super useful for that, supposedly. and it's not really found on Earth, but apparently in comparison, it's super abundant on the moon. Ricardo was also looking into like a few of the minerals that could potentially be mined from the moon as well. But something else that is an issue with that is that the moon is small, right? Like,
Yeah, relatively small compared to like all the other planets, including Earth.
yeah. So I personally don't know how economically feasible like using the moon as a source for like resources is, but the other aspect to economic profit in the moon, I suppose, would be like space tourism, which I feel like Elon Musk, like
Like his business,
that's
yeah.
his business.
Dang. Yeah, so it's really exciting to just like kind of hear about this, but yeah, especially with like the economic driving factor, I think that obviously the moon has some minerals that perhaps aren't as abundant in on the Earth. But one of the things that I really foresee potentially, depending on obviously what the moon has to offer, would be for things such as chips or different types of electronic production. Just because we've had an economic and chip shortage back in 2020, whenever like the
Yeah.
pandemic was in full swing. I personally knew that like a whole bunch of different like car dealerships and just like manufacturing plants for cars, like including Ford, had little trucks just like there lying around dead because they literally had no chips
Yeah.
to put in them, right? And I think as we move forward through our time here on Earth, those chip shortages would just become worse and worse. Like obviously there's a lot of resources on Earth, but things such as gold, things such as lithium, especially for batteries, like those things that are finite and we can't really like reuse, or at the very least I've never heard of like recycling lithium.
Yeah, no.
Gold, there's been some attempts to recycle gold from like old electronics, but the process again is like very costly, very time consuming. So unless there are like more efficient ways to get these elements back, I think eventually we'll have to look for other resources, and the moon is just, I think, the beginning of that. I know that I'm not sure if it was NASA or just like some other people speculating that we could potentially send different spacecrafts to asteroids to land on
Mm-hmm.
them and basically have some type of galactic mining
Yeah.
association where we could get a lot of the resources that we really need for the electronics that we use every day. So there might be some economic viability there, but I definitely really see space tourism being a thing.
Yeah.
Like even if we don't necessarily get to having space like hotels on the side of the
That would
moon,
be crazy.
I know that would be insane. But even something as simple as like having the ability to go on a trip to simply like see the stars, right?
Yeah.
Like a to and from
In
the moon.
orbit, I think is a lot more reasonable. I'm pretty sure. I wish I remembered what celebrity, but I'm pretty sure there's one celebrity that's or one famous person that's like paying Elon Musk a ton of money in order to like just go see the
So like
the
space stars.
atmosphere. Yeah, like just go out on a rocket ship, just like for funsies.
Dang. Yeah, and that's I didn't think I honestly get to see the day. Like obviously when you're a little kid, like you're always thinking about like, oh, what's the next big thing, or like I don't know, like jetpacks was a thing that like
Yeah,
I think like every like middle schooler or like
yeah,
elementary
yeah,
schooler was thinking, oh, like hoverboards, right?
yeah,
And sort of as you grow up, you get this sense of like, oh, we're actually like not advancing as like fast as we think we are.
yeah.
But like space tourism is just like
It
such a
feels so out
wild
there.
idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you often see it in like futuristic movies or just like sci-fi stuff. One example is, so there's this anime called what is it, Vivi Florid Eye Song. It was an animated original. It has like no manga, no like other works stemming from it. The whole idea is like you have this robot that's in the future after like humanity has been killed by robots, and
Mm-hmm.
then this scientist basically sends her memories back to her body like before all this happened so that she can prevent it.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's really cool. And one of the things that sort of like stands out to me is this idea of, in one of like the episodes, she basically has to be a helper on this like literal cruise ship, but it's like a space cruise ship that takes people like around. I'm not
Interesting.
exactly sure like exactly where in space, but just to like make them see the stars and stuff. And so she's one of the helpers, like a robot helper inside of
Oh
that
wow.
like thing. And so she has to save everyone from like dying after some things go wrong inside of the ship. So that could be like a possibility, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, if we get further enough into things like an intergalactic cruise ship.
That would be sick. I think, yeah, I think that's one of the more realistic things, honestly. Realistic, relatively speaking.
In quotation marks, yeah.
Yeah. Especially because we currently don't really have a presence on the moon or even Mars, which is where a lot of people want to go. And where I'm super excited to see the future of space exploration. But yeah, I feel like just having some sort of large thing in orbit around the Earth is something that some people would pay a lot of money to just go experience.
Yeah, I think the further we go with technology and the easier it becomes, it'll be way better for people, especially flat earthers. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of this, but there was this famous like flat earther who basically like got a lot of funds to make his own like ship, like
Really?
little rocket, and like shoot himself up into space to see the curvature.
Oh my god.
And I'm pretty sure he died doing that because like one of the times it just kind of like,
I guess we'll never know if the Earth is flat or not.
yeah, exactly,
Wow.
until we get intergalactic spaceships and
Yeah.
cruises. But yeah, I don't know. Like the Artemis, it seems still so far away. So how is, do you know like the timeline of the events, or like they're hoping to get like in the
Ish.
next like
Yeah.
3-4 years? Like,
So Artemis 2, the one that isn't doing the permanent thing on the moon, that one is scheduled for 2024. It's going to get pushed back.
for sure.
Similarly, Artemis 3 is scheduled for like December 2025. Don't quote me on that. Definitely 2025 though. But that's likely going to be pushed back to like no sooner than 2026. I don't know why they're being pushed back, but it happens. Yeah, so I do think though before 2030 we will have at least one of those like missions go out.
Yeah, and do you think, obviously, like this is sort of speculation. Obviously, they're wanting to go there for research purposes, but do you think that this sort of escalating back to trying to get to more of having a presence in space is probably also due to the fact that like our planet is kind of on a downhill trend? Like, do you think there might be some interest here and there of like, can we actually like establish some sort of colony or living in another planet?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's on a lot of people's minds. Like when you think of going to the moon and stuff, you're like, oh, like what if we could live there? I know a lot of people are just kind of like, oh, get rid of this planet, like move on to the next one, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of mentality. But like we're nowhere close to that right now. Um, we've barely gone to the moon. Definitely not feasible to live on the moon like as it currently is. So, and also the Earth's population might be a little bit too much for the moon too. And like we haven't been to like there have been no humans to Mars even yet. So
Yeah.
but that's like definitely something that's on a lot of people's minds, and I definitely do think that's something that NASA will explore. NASA,
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX, literally everyone. Yeah, they'll definitely be looking into that once they figure out how to like terraform Mars or create like temporary like actual like housing for astronauts so they can see what it's like to live there.
Dang, and that's really interesting, especially because I feel like we would have gotten to the point earlier, especially like using the moon as a testing ground for a lot of these like different technologies. I feel like it seems kind of far fetched, but a lot of big companies like SpaceX are pulling all their efforts towards Mars,
Yeah.
which obviously like they're doing that because Mars has had the hints of having water, of having all these like different resources which are more conducive to just having life. But at the same time, we haven't used the capabilities that we have. We just have the moon like right there
Exactly.
to test a lot of these technologies. But like like you said, we've only been there once, and so really developing these technologies, which as it doesn't really happen that often, but these technologies which can potentially like bring forth some good changes on Earth, right? Like I know different types of fuel that are being tested, like all these sort of trickle down into just regular everyday use,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. So I wonder if like through getting these technologies to work really well in an environment that is not conducive to life, perhaps we could make the environment here better,
Yeah.
which is something that I've really thought of. Obviously, like it's not a solution. Like we should really be looking into like renewable energies and like more than just like how can we just like
change everything.
yeah, exactly. How do we just like take out the trash and just kind of like make a new set? But yeah, but that's like one of the things that like I'm really curious about and hoping for is having the potential to reshape a lot of the things that we have here on Earth by, having all these technologies be developed for Mars, because that's also something that a lot of people are critical of.
Yeah.
And even with, I'm sure, with the Artemis like space mission, right? It's being mostly funded, or probably all funded, by the U.S. government, just because it's coming from NASA. Like, I did see on their website that they're working with like other companies, but I'm sure those companies aren't really getting that much profit off of it.
Exactly. That's like one thing about um, space research and like uh, all of the moon exploration stuff in general. Something that's super interesting is just like the public facingness of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's just very like um, everyone knows everything about all of the trips to the moon, all of the like satellites, all of the rovers, all of the Mars rovers, right? Um, like the public interest in these projects significantly affects them, like
Mm-hmm.
so much so that it's like people do this research like to appease the public almost. So that's kind of why I think like so many companies are working towards like going just to Mars, because
Yeah.
that's what the public's interested in, because like we've been to the moon once. Like if someone does it again, it's not as exciting.
Right. It's
Like
like
it's
old
still
news.
exciting, but it's not like groundbreaking research anymore because it's been done, but Mars hasn't been done. So everyone's trying to get there first because that'll generate more public interest and make more money. But one thing that NASA is doing with Artemis 3 that is kind of fun and exciting is that they're going to send the first woman to the moon and the first person of color. Why they're not sending more than just one woman or one person of color or maybe like a woman of color, I don't know. But it's still exciting because,
Right.
again, the only people who have been on the moon are white men. So,
Yeah, which is also something to think about. Yeah, so it's really interesting because I know for sure that like a lot of people always debate like, do we even need to go to the moon, right?
yeah.
Like that's honestly like that's one of the reasons why NASA has been kind of like underfunded
Mm-hmm.
throughout the years. And we had the space race, NASA was like on top of it, right? But then after that, like everything just kind of quieted down. Like all the research that was happening around space exploration just kind of died down as well. And I think this Artemis project, even though we're going back to the moon, is to try to reignite that fire of people and that curiosity of like wanting to see what's out there. Because obviously, like, there's more, probably, not probably, like, there are definitely more pressing issues like on Earth happening. And that's something that even people within the like Futurism Club, an organization, have like, whenever we had episodes similar to this, talked about the fact that like we're spending, or the US is spending so much money on space exploration or on like NASA. Couldn't they spend it on like other things?
Yeah.
Right. But I always feel like that's sort of like it's a very weird debate to have,
It is.
because you don't truly know the effects of whatever research you're doing, and if that money could really be doing something better.
Yeah.
Because you could theoretically say the same thing about like many other things.
About everything, essentially.
About
It's like,
everything.
oh, why are we prioritizing this over this?
The only hill I will die on that like kind of encompasses that is the military budget.
I agree.
But I feel like that's kind of like common knowledge that like a lot of money is spent on that.
Yep.
And it's kind of like not great.
How is it?
I heard of like this one, they did an audit for the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
And like it was so funny because they failed the audit like 3 times back to back,
Oh my gosh.
because they were like, "Oh, where did this money go? I don't know."
It's just
It's just gone.
Someone eats it.
Exactly, it's just gone.
dissipates.
So there's definitely more of a managerial thing that should happen with a lot of the money, but I feel like especially for igniting that passion back for, space and getting more scientists, and like you were saying, like having a woman, having a person of color, right? People who are able to bring others towards having this newfound fascination of
Yeah.
space, and perhaps getting people into schools like Hopkins or other elite schools, right, to advance this field. I know for sure that Hopkins is really great at doing a lot of space stuff. The fact that we have the APL,
Yeah.
and they're doing a lot of stuff, and also I'm pretty sure either like JHU or like a subsidiary of JHU, maybe APL, was straight up just like working with the team that was doing stuff for the Mars rover
I think APL does do that.
and the Space Web, the telescope as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
So, which is really great. I personally haven't had any one particular like friend or acquaintance that's worked with the APO with that,
Mhm.
but I've heard of people
Yeah.
like, have
I
you?
have. Yeah, I have a friend whose brother and his wife work for
Both of
APL,
them.
and they work like on rovers and stuff. Yeah, I know. Very smart, very smart, very they make a lot of money. Good for them.
Good for them.
But yeah, it's super cool like the work that APL does. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's kind of exciting to see that like oh, maybe like the passion for space exploration will be reignited again, and then more things will happen, and maybe someone will have more ideas than going to the moon or landing on Mars, because I think those are the two
Like the two big
main
ones.
things right now,
Yeah.
moon and Mars. But there hasn't really been interest in sending rockets out for anything else, I feel like.
No, the only thing that I remember, or like they made a big deal about, the last thing was the whole redirecting an asteroid through like crashing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a satellite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was part of sort of like a space defense
Yeah.
initiative that they were going with. I'm pretty sure they're still testing stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
which that in and of itself is like another conversation. Like, and I'm pretty sure we've had this probably like last year, but like having the ability to potentially like save the planet from a mass extinction caused by a asteroid or something like that,
Yeah.
which could possibly like be true, right? We could have that ability eventually, which would be really great. But yeah, like going to space. Do you know of any other like people that are going to space in terms of like governments? I know the U.S. is this is the U.S. NASA, right? Do you know of any other governments or like entities that are also sort of joining in with NASA to try to get to the moon again?
Yeah. So I know the Artemis 2 also has people, obviously. It's a manned mission. That is NASA working pretty closely in tandem with the Canadian Space Agency. That might not be what they're called, but whatever space agency that the Canadian government has, NASA and them are pretty tight. So it's going to be a crew of like um, like equal amounts of Americans and Canadians going on that. I'm pretty sure they're all white men, but it is what it is. Um, and they might not even be. That's just what I remember.
Okay.
So yeah. Other than that, for Artemis 3, I know the European Space Agency, whatever the name of that is working with NASA specifically on the moon landing station that I was talking about earlier. And again, like it's not going to be super big. Like it'll literally be the size of like maybe like a big bedroom or like an apartment. Like this
So
is
like
not going to be a big thing at
okay,
all.
okay.
It's literally just enough space for astronauts to have the ability to do research within the moon's orbit.
Okay.
So this is why I say like semi-permanent presence, right? Because that is not like a viable space to live in for large amounts of time, or like essentially any amount of time. But it is like a good first step. And we also do have to keep in mind like the moon is pretty small. Like
Yeah.
how big of something can you put in its orbit?
You're right. Which is, yeah, I don't know. That's, it's interesting, I guess, also the effects that it will have on the, of course, like we've had or we've known of astronauts spending a whole bunch of time up in space and then having potentially like effects
Yeah.
on their body. I know one thing for sure is muscle atrophy is like a really big issue, which they have to like work out with bands or like, actually, now that I think about it, like, did they use bands before bands became popular? I'm sure they must have, right?
Probably.
Because like realistically,
That
like
was a
in
while
space,
ago.
you don't use weights because
Yeah, because
right, but like resistance bands,
yeah.
it's based on resistance, not weight,
Interesting.
right?
Setting trends.
Right? I don't know. Maybe yeah. Maybe it was because you know in space you have to keep some level of like exercise that is not relying on simply weights because obviously there's no like weight in space really. So what tends to happen is that a lot of like the muscles of people will tend to atrophy, and so they'll get smaller, they'll get weaker, and so by the
Yeah.
time they return, if they don't do any exercise, like you can't do anything, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like for some, if you have to repair something on the space station, that requires even a little bit of force. If your muscles are atrophied,
What are you gonna do?
you're gonna be scrawny. You're not gonna be able to like
Yeah.
move anything. But yeah, I just came to that realization because I was just thinking of like, what do you do in space to like keep fit?
Yeah.
Like
that's
how
so
do you
interesting.
keep your muscles, your strength, like, and then some level of metabolic like good activity,
Mhm.
right? Because that's also something to think about. But yeah, I think they might use bands. I should do some research on that
Yeah.
as someone that like goes to the gym because you know you see people in the gym like using bands for like
Yeah.
various things.
My dad loves resistance bands. He's a big fan.
Yeah, and they're real like they've been really proven to like work
Yeah.
really well in
Mm-hmm.
combination with like regular weights, because you know sometimes when you're at the top of the movement, at the bottom of the movement, there is no resistance,
Yeah.
so you get a little bit of break. And if you want to like really maximize your gains in the gym, you usually want to keep tension
Mm-hmm.
in some sort of way like throughout the entire movement, so that you're really working, basically
Yeah.
having no rest period in between. uh so, and people like use bands in order to do that, because obviously like the more you pull, the higher the resistance gets.
Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. So maybe the Artemis mission will somehow turn into like better gym innovations,
Maybe. Maybe.
potentially, if they do
Don't know.
that. But yeah. So speaking of more in terms of like what this can mean for like the future, and in terms of what this will really have an impact on, I feel like, especially when we're talking about the economic, like again going back into economics and who gets to be here, most of the time, at least in NASA's part, it's just going to be people that are qualified,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the main thing. I know SpaceX is, like you said before, focused more on the tourism aspect and like gaining money. So, and especially with recent trends in technology going up with artificial intelligence, those models are becoming extremely smart. I wonder if there is a way to have less qualified people and potentially an unmanned, not unmanned, but like unpiloted spaceship
Mm.
going, like automatic, going to the moon and back because of all these efforts.
That'd be so interesting. That makes me think of like this doesn't directly answer your question, but
Uh
it'd
huh.
be cool to have some sort of like almost conveyor belt system
Uh huh.
between the moon and Earth eventually, like
Yeah.
some sort of rotating thing like for tourists, like some sort of space walkway. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, in that sense, people like civilians like us, we don't know. I don't think either of us could man a rocket,
No.
no matter how hard we tried.
No.
But yeah, I feel like something like that could potentially be viable. I think it'd be more realistic for something like that to be like auto piloted for like going into Earth's orbit,
Mhm.
chilling for a little bit, and then coming back.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit more realistic, just
Yeah.
because like once you get on the moon, like what do you do? I'm assuming it'd be like, I don't know, like there'd be a little moon, like not airport, maybe spaceport.
Spaceport.
Spaceport, a little moon spaceport, like on the other side, and you
Uh
like
huh.
check in and stuff. But I don't see why that couldn't be a thing.
Yeah, and I feel like they sort of have to, especially if they're wanting to send supplies up there,
Oh, true.
which is, one of the things that, like, for the International Space Station is something that they have to do once in a while. Like, there's,
Yeah.
even if we don't, like, really see it or hear it on the news anymore, whenever there are people up there, sometimes they need supplies, right? So they'll send spaceships,
Yeah.
right, up there to get supplies. And eventually, if there are enough people on the moon actually doing a lot of these things, well, there's got to be food, there's got to be different like supplies, materials, and so I feel like having that semi-presence of the moon sort of creates this need for these types of like new technologies, right? Because if you're going to obviously like the International Space Station, although it's being used, I don't think I've heard of like it being used very much
Nope,
nowadays,
not anymore.
right?
Because people are bored of it now.
Yeah, like there's only so much you can do in the International Space Station. I know they've tried to grow plants, and we've heard that over the years, but like there's nothing really like groundbreaking, like you were
Yeah.
saying. But in the case of like the moon, there will be renewed efforts to try to get a supply chain to and from the moon. Not only for like investigation of like space rocks and different effects from, you know, the moon and then back. So we'll have to have some sort of automatic way or easier way to get supplies up there. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that, like you were saying, maybe not necessarily getting to the moon's surface, but perhaps like this intermediary, you know, object where we could land on,
Yeah.
or simply like drop supplies. Maybe not even like completely unmanned,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe have a person that doesn't necessarily have. Obviously, they need to have the capabilities in case someone goes wrong, but like it wouldn't be something that is needed,
Yeah.
and the person wouldn't have to be there on time the entire way. So, and I think that leaves the door open to having more technologies where we can have unmanned or unpiloted crews of people going for either tourism or actual scientists,
Yeah.
right? There are so many bright people that aren't astronauts, and I don't
Right.
think that's something we really think about,
No, that's true.
right? There are very special capabilities that you need to have in order to be an astronaut, and that's why me and Neha can't be astronauts. As I don't know, maybe we want to do some like weird, at least in my case, like CS experiment in space, right? Like how does space affect running programs? Probably not, but like can they?
You never know.
You never know, right? And so, for example, I can't necessarily do that as a person because being an astronaut takes years. Like it's a whole ordeal that you have to go through.
Live to be an astronaut.
Basically, that's your whole life. And so, having these different technologies would allow bright, like extremely bright people to have and do experiments in space, which I don't think is something we really talked about either. Just like the ability, expanding the ability for people that don't have the capabilities of being astronauts to be astronauts, right? And lowering that threshold to really be able to do either experiments or just other creative endeavors in space.
Yeah.
Which I think is, a really cool idea that we can probably look a little bit more into.
For sure.
I know. Is there anything else we forgot to talk about with Artemis? Or anything else you'd like to bring up?
I don't think so. I will say, you were talking about like, oh, it'd be cool to have like this little like intermediary like thing in between the moon and the earth for like transport purposes.
Right.
I think that's a little bit of the purpose of the moon landing station thing, as I've been calling it. I hope that's its name. But yeah, obviously it's not directly in the middle, but that is supposed to serve as like the waypoint of sorts. So like every astronaut would always stop there, like get supplies or whatever, and then like head over to the moon. So yeah.
So a pit stop.
Yeah, exactly. A little pit stop. Fun stuff.
Interesting. So we're creating space highways with their own. I'm just, I just want to see like a Shell gas station just up there on the moon with its convenience store.
That'll be the first thing on the moon.
A petrol station.
Yep.
Amazing.
That brings up another thing. I don't know how much time we have, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Just like the commercialization of the moon, and also like who owns the moon, like can anyone just kind of like go up there? Like if you can get up there, can you do whatever? Or is it like international property?
Right.
What are the rules and regulations on like what you can do on the moon? Like once we get there and start establishing like permanent settlements, who can do that? How and for what purpose? Right.
Like I know the U.S. got there first, but like they don't own the moon.
Yeah, we don't own the moon.
No one really owns the moon either. Does moon laws is like government law? Like if for example, I know like they did the experiment in Russia of like the twins, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like mega illegal, like no. But like does the same rules apply on like the moon? Like can they reach you? I know we had like the whole Space Force, right? And they wanted to like make that a thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of is a thing, but like it's kind of useless right now.
Yeah.
So like but like what validity, what like power does the US Space Force have over the moon?
It's very interesting. I don't think anyone knows the answers to those questions though, to be fair, because it's just like so far in the future that they will be an issue. But eventually, okay, maybe not that far in the future, because like, I feel like in the next like 20 years that like could be an issue of some sort.
Yeah, because like
eventually people will argue on the regulations. Yeah,
because like for example, like the International Space Station, like since you can't really do much, it just kind of like, oh yeah, this is like a safe spot for like
for
everyone here. Like it's chill, right? Sure, your countries might have some beef with each other, but like that's not gonna affect you really in the International Space Station. Yeah. But in the case of the moon, when you have semi-permanent like settlements, like that'll be a huge issue.
Yeah.
Like and especially like you were saying, the commercialization. Like, what if you can buy plots of land on the moon?
Right.
Like, what if you want to build a house on the moon? Like, who do you pay? Like
to do that? True.
Like who are you giving your money to get a plot of moon? Like, it's not just the U.S. and you can't just like give the money to just Earth in general.
And then in that case, you also can't just like do it without can you just do it? If you can get there, can
I feel like that's kind of it's kind of the law of lawlessness, right?
Right.
Like, because there is no rules, you make your own rules, and I guess it kind of goes initially.
Yeah.
I mean, they did that with the Earth too.
This is true.
So I wonder if the same space colonization and Space Wars. Maybe that's what the Space Force was for. Yeah. But we'll eventually see the effects of this, and I think that's probably like another conversation, just specifically
Definitely.
talking about the commercialization of space.
Yeah.
Because like we said before, there's a lot of different minerals that the Earth needs that we're running out of. There is also the potential for just leaving Earth, because we kind of like, not us, not Gen Z. We're cool, we're chill.
Yeah, we're
But
staying
like,
here.
older generations, specifically baby boomers, just kind of like went off a cliff and kind of doomed us all in a way. So obviously there's like efforts to try to get out of here and do something better, and also efforts to try to reverse whatever change we've done, which is kind of reversible at this point. How many years do we have? Like 5, 7?
0, I feel like. No, the like remember that one date, like the I don't remember what it was called, but it was essentially the point where it was like
Of no return.
yes, the point of no return. Like we passed that.
Oh.
So
Goody.
so like yeah, technically damage to the earth at this point is irreversible. I don't think I and most people ever expected it to be entirely reversed at any point in the future. I think we've messed up the planet in irreparable ways, no matter how far technology develops. But yeah, I think we should probably work on that a little bit more before we start messing up other places.
Yeah, so that's also something to keep in mind, right? Like, we obviously don't want our very bad decisions to just affect other planets, especially if potentially they're our only like salvation. Or I don't know, maybe aliens will get like pissed at us. Maybe if there exists on Mars.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that should probably end our conversation here. It was very insightful. Obviously, like, we didn't do a whole bunch of research, so it was a lot of just like speculating here.
Yes.
But I mean, that's kind of fun, right? Like, just getting to speculate, and that's also one of the reasons why we created Futurism. Yeah. Everything doesn't necessarily have to be super researched, and that's also something that you guys as the viewers should also keep in mind, is that take everything we say with a grain of salt.
Of course, these are our opinions, and they might not be entirely factually correct.
Exactly. Of course, we try to bring you information that is, feasible and a little bit more grounded. But sometimes it's just fun to ideate and get these ideas out there, because, maybe a wild idea that like is never been possible, especially like, space commercialization. We can, we're kind of talking here like it's not going to happen, right? Like, it seems very far away, but who knows? Maybe like some person will actually just somehow write a document saying he's the leader or the lord of the moon, and then he'll sell like plots, and then we'll have this whole like
someone is
US
like 100%
government debate.
Gonna do
Right,
that.
exactly. Like, this will probably get in like the courts in the next like 10 to 20 years, right? Like, somebody claiming ownership of the moon or something, right? I don't know, it can happen. And so getting to talk about these different ideas beforehand just gives you a little bit more perspective, which I think is really nice. So yeah, but obviously take it with a grain of salt, make your own decisions. Go to the NASA's Artemis project webpage and sort of look through there. Friendly. Yeah, and so I don't know, maybe you can potentially become the next person of whatever, right? To be on the moon and hopefully have a little fun, maybe even for just tourism. So yeah, that about ends our episode for today. So thank you guys for watching, and we hope you get to ponder upon space and see what you can come up with. So, all right, see you guys.
Great.